Blog Talk Radio.
Live from Washington, D.C., it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio. QLPOR, as it's widely known, features a bevy of poets, spoken word artists, and live poetry readings with best-selling authors. Your host is Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the program. Tonight, my special guest is Alexander Poster. The title of his new chapbook is A Refuge for Those Who Like Sad Endings. A beautiful, beautiful title. He's also looking for a publisher, so if you know one, let's talk. All right. If you are a publisher, let's talk, because we're ready. Alexander, how are you, sir?
Yes, I'm doing great this evening.
Fantastic. Let's begin our poetic journey together, all right?
All right.
All right. What I want to know from you first, my friend, is what is poetry to you?
To me, and I've heard a lot of different definitions, but to me, poetry is the best distillation or purification of an emotion or an idea that you're trying to express, almost like a crystallization that you've kind of boiled off everything else, and what's left is poetry. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the most succinct way to say that, but it's the most pure and the most distilled, kind of. If prose is 20 proof, poetry is like 100 proof, so to speak.
Share that one more time, the very last part. What did you say?
Well, if prose is 20 proof, if it's a Budweiser, right, then poetry is 100. It's 100 proof. Yeah, all right.
That's what I thought you said. I just wanted to hear it again. I like that. Okay, now we know what it is. Why do you think it's important? Why is it important?
Poetry is important because it's all around us, and I think it's around us to the extent that people don't notice it. I mean, you mentioned, or one mentions poetry, and one thinks of a radio show like this, but, anytime you listen to a commercial, anytime you hear a phrase from a politician, there's poetry in it. And I mean, some of it is not very good. Some of it's not inspired. Some of it is. And this is a fictional example, but I'll give it. If you watch the show Mad Men, which was about advertising, the character Don Draper is trying to sell a slide projector. And, I mean, it's just a slide projector. It's no different than any others. But he presents it as a carousel of memories. And it's, that's such a wonderful metaphor. And, you have all of this stuff around you all day, every day. People writing poetry as copy, people are poets and they might not even be aware of it. So it's something that's just in your environment, that's all around you. And that's why people should care, because it's part of their lives, whether they know it or not.
Wow. I like that. Alexander. As you think about your body of work, your manuscript, your book, What are some of the predominant themes?
Okay, so for a refuge for those who like sad endings, the predominant theme, although there were other themes, the predominant theme was mortality. This was written during the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a lot of political instability, and I did a lot of, maybe you could say, navel gazing, but existential contemplating about what was going to happen, how things were going to happen. And, that's what I put down on the page. And I mean, if you think about the two most important events in in the life of most people, I mean, it's birth and death. So it's kind of kind of universal. So that's what the chapbook's focused on. Otherwise, I do focus more broadly. I write the poems have a political angle. There's a bunch about COVID. To just be honest, I've been in the thick of it. I live 1 mile from the U.S. Capitol. I heard the flashbangs on January 6th. Wow. There were Trump supporters, running down my street. It was, and I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that because it was freaking terrifying, man.
Yes.
That I was glued to my phone, texting my friends, getting updates on Twitter minute by minute. It's not something I want to relive. I got COVID. It was Omicron, but it was unpleasant. So some of the events that are gloomy in the chapbook are things that have kind of happened to me, and writing about them served as a bit of a catharsis, honestly.
Well, very nice. I appreciate you sharing. So what I'd like you to do at this point is share a poem.
Okay. So I guess the first poem I'll share is Thanksgiving Morning Thoughts About Death. That's a bright, cheery title, but it's the first one in the chapbook, and I guess I'll just go ahead with it.
Yes.
So, I often wonder when I will die. I think it has to do with objects and my kinship with them. One time, my wife lost her blanket. She was swaddled in it as an infant. When we left the hotel room, I told her we had it with us. I thought we did, but I was in a hurry. I can't think about that blanket straddled in the wilderness and my wife's incandescent round tears without it being a watershed moment of remorse. I think about the time I yelled at her when she wore an efflorescent blouse, pink with roses and butterflies. She never wore it again. No balm in Gilead, no sinner's cure, including her reassurance that a baby puked on it, has made me remember it without contrition. There are so many places I will not go, and people I will not see. Charles Bronson once said, responsibility is a big rock that weighs a ton, and it bends you until it finally buries you. I have no idea if he is right. He yelled that at some children on a Hollywood set. But I don't think he wanted to go back to that set after all his caterwauling. I'm not crazy. I know every crazy person says that. But just maybe you die when there is nothing left to swaddle you and no place to go for asylum whether your heart stirs or not. Charles Bronson died at 81, years after he had stopped visiting familiar places, his hip replaced by a rock of scrap metal. And that's it.
Mm. What is the purpose of that poem, Alexander? Tell me more about it.
It's kind of about remorse.
Okay.
And just how you kind of build up remorse for things that you've done in your life. Whether they caused harm or whether they didn't, and how, it takes, it's like a backpack. The load just gets heavier. And, basically, as a metaphor, I use different objects like my wife's blouse or her blanket, or Charles Bronson and his big rock. But but it has a weight that weighs you down until if you're going to contemplate mortality, and this is the first poem in the chapbook, I guess the question to ask is, what is mortality? Is it death, or is it some kind of a spiritual death? And maybe there's a time where you can't go anywhere or do much because you have bitter or sad memories or remorseful memories of every place. I mean, it seems in some ways, I guess the more you transgress, the smaller your world gets. So until it's gone. So that's kind of the main impetus behind the poem.
All right, very nice. How does a poem begin for you, my friend? With an idea, a form, or an image?
So the answer, I guess, would be all of those. There are two ways I kind of start a poem, and one is from the head and one is from the heart. I have something called, I call it the cooler. It's just a little document I have of things that I've said during the day, or I've overheard and kind of altered a bit, that are poetic, just little phrases. And, sometimes I'll have an idea for a poem and it'll just kind of come naturally, and I'll just write it from the heart. And by the heart, I mean with a thesaurus and a rhyming dictionary and all of that. But then I'll go over it with the cooler and see if there's, anything that can be, better, anything that can be more precise. I want this to be the highest proof possible, extending the metaphor that we talked about before. So that's one way. The other way is because sometimes you don't always have that, inspiration, that, it's just a regular day. You're not feeling strong about anything in particular, but to visit the cooler, to visit, these images you've described, these metaphors, these kind of sentences that grab your attention, and take one of them and just start writing. and see where it leads you, and it will eventually link up with the heart, and you'll kind of find out what the poem's about, and then you're inspired. But so it's, I guess, inspiration and perspiration.
All right.
Yeah.
Inspiration and perspiration. Audience, did you hear that? Inspiration and perspiration. Please share another poem.
Sure thing. I will do that. This poem is called Translucent Times. It's similar to the first. This one is not in the chapbook. It's a new poem. I wish instead of growing old, we would slowly disappear. Rather than talking about Grandpa's DEATH, the opaque children who squinted to see the old man would be unburdened and face the day with eyes open. But it's best not to stare at the sun even if you wear shades. Days are long and life is short, and radiance burns the retina of the enlightened. My silhouette has changed. I cast a wider shadow as the years pass, and people who laugh about the sunbeams I block should pull the beam out of their own eye and embrace the bright blindness of clarity, since death is all around us, eclipsing the transparent. And that's it.
Wow. You know, I'm the kind of guy that likes to hear a poem twice, because the first time I hear it, I'm listening for, I don't know, the delivery, that kind of thing. Now I want to hear it for the content. Share it one more time, please.
Absolutely. I wish instead of growing old, we would slowly disappear. Rather than talking about Grandpa's DEATH, the opaque children who squinted to see the old man would be unburdened and face the day with eyes open. But it's best not to stare at the sun, even if you wear shades. Days are long and life is short, and radiance burns the retina of the enlightened. My silhouette has changed. I cast a wider shadow as the years pass, and people who laugh about the sunbeams I block should pull the beam out of their own eye and eclipse the bright blindness of clarity, since death is all around us, eclipsing the transparent.
Do you think that through your poetry, it helps you, and this may be a stretch, but talk to me, that it helps you understand potentially your existential crisis?
Yeah. At least it helps me engage it in a way I think that's constructive. At least it helps me get something out of it that's productive and hopefully nice. And maybe acclimate it to acclimate me with it in a way that's not so hostile. I think that's definitely possible. I mean, I'm the kind of guy who turns the ship towards the storm. Because I want to get through the storm. I want to get it over with, and that's not a good way to think about death. But in terms of maybe fear of mortality, of thanatophobia, I guess maybe that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, I want to share for those who may not know what an existential crisis is, and I found a perfect definition. It says the existential crisis can be defined as certain moments in life when people question whether their lives have a clear meaning or purpose or even a value attached to it. It may be common, but it does not necessarily mean we are depressed or having a negative approach to life. We're just questioning what life is. And it sounds like that's what you're doing through your poetry, questioning what life is, where you talk about birth and mortality, questioning what life is. Well, let's go back a little bit, all right?
Okay.
All right. I enjoy talking to you. I can go to the dictionary. I love it. All right. Let's go back in your past. What was an early experience where you learned that poetic language had power? Talk to me.
Well, I was a kid, and to give you a bit of background on me, my dad was a professor of education. My mom, and they're alive. They're probably listening. They're listening, but my mom was a visual artist. So I grew up in a home where there was a lot of art. So I grew up around Shel Silverstein. I actually remember beyond sort of how I was raised, kind of my first poetic moment. I was thinking about it the other day, and it was when Michael Jackson's Bad came out. And
right.
I was a very young kid at the time. And, I couldn't understand it, and I had to ask my parents because I didn't understand why Michael Jackson wanted to be bad. I mean, that's bad. And that's when I learned about figurative language. But going back, when I was a teenager, I discovered Ogden Nash. And I still really like his stuff. He's untrained, but he does, but his poems can be very thoughtful, and especially when you look at the COVID pandemic and some of his medical poems, a lot of that stuff stands up. And I think coming into adulthood, in college, I had a chance to meet a gentleman who was a poet. He was giving a talk, and his name was Sherman Alexie. And I was able to meet with him a bit. And one of the things that struck me, since I followed him since meeting him, it was an influential talk, is how sometimes, I don't know if I'm doing it subconsciously or unconsciously, but, I kind of mimic his tone a little bit, that his writing is very dark. There are moments, there are existential moments, but there's also humor. So in terms of where I am and being where I am, those are poetic influences. I'd also like to cite some other folks.
Yes, please.
Nick Cave, who's an Australian musician, is also a brilliant lyricist, and he writes all of this fantastic, gloomy stuff that's kind of terrific. And, he was an inspiration for this project because he is prolific in the amount of stuff that he puts out. And someone asked, well, what happens when you're not inspired? And he just wrote, I write every day and I write until I'm inspired. And, I've written poetry in the past, but, that's like, maybe if I want to write a chapbook, I should write a poem once a week. And if something doesn't come to me, then I just sit down and I write the poem. So Nick Cave, I think I like wordplay. I think in hip hop you have the best rhymed poets alive. Lil Wayne is also a tremendous influence on me. He'll have a rap song and, he'll have fantastic, metaphors. Like she ain't no angel, I use her halo like a frisbee. Stuff like that.
All right.
Just terrific. And he'll use, phrases with double, triple, quadruple entendres. And I really think it's fantastic. So I guess you could say, some of my inspiration comes from pop culture and some of it comes from the poetic world.
Wow, very nice. Well, what I'd like us to do right now is to take a brief break, and we'll be right back. Back. I am Michael Anthony Ingram. I am here with Alexander Poster, and as I share with you, Alexander, this is a call-in show. All right? The call-in number, if you'd like to talk to Alexander, is 646-787-1631, and we have a caller, my friend. We have a caller.
Okay. All right.
I like to bring this person on. The area code is 240. The first three numbers are 215. You're on the air with Alexander. Good evening.
Yeah, hi, good evening. What a great interview so far. As I listen, one of the questions I have for Alex is, it's interesting. He sort of, as I was on the line thinking about this question, he sort of segued into it. He had mentioned, in terms of the best rhyming poets. And what I was going to ask him was, how does he feel about the role of rhyme in poetry? Because, of course, like Shakespeare's time, for instance, things rhymed, and that was part of the craft. But that's so fallen out of favor in the literary world. Now it's, rhymed poetry is something that lives in song lyrics and hip-hop. So I guess without being too specific, I would like to hear his thoughts on, the role of rhyming in today's poetry, if it has one.
Oh, very nice.
I'll hang up and listen to his answer.
All right, then. Thank you for calling.
First of all, I think that's a terrific question, and it's a question I wrestle with myself. Personally, I like rhymes in poetry, and one of the things, I guess if you replay the episode, that's different from the first poem I read and the second poem I read, is the amount of consonants and assonants in it. And I'm trying to kind of work rhymes in different ways because they have fallen out of favor. But I do like rhymed poetry. I do like some of the old forms that really kind of mold and perfect language. I'm a fan of them, and I wish there was maybe a little more room for them. The chapbooks a refuge for those who like sad endings. I think maybe in literary poetry there needs to be a refuge for people who like things to rhyme, basically. And let me tell you, it's a challenge to write an unrhymed poem without those rules, since there are so many places you can go. But there is something about, hearing the rhythm in someone's voice and hearing lines end, with that gratifying symmetry that I really admire too.
Well, okay, go ahead, continue, please.
I don't especially have a preference one over the other, but I think rhymed poetry can be terrific, and I think although it isn't as it was in the literary circles, I think in popular music, I think in hip-hop, people have actually taken it further than, where it was, in the 19th and the start of the 20th century, and actually done more with it.
All right. Please share a poem, my friend.
Okay. I will do that. Since my dad's listening, I thought I'd do this one. It's called The Old Man of the Sea. The Old Man in the Sea. My father was in his 20s when he ate his first pizza. It just wasn't around when he was a kid. The Italian places served soup and cold sandwiches instead. Then he took part in the great symbiosis. We made pizza big, and it made us big in return. I was at summer camp, and in a moment of ironic egg, the trip to the water park was canceled by rain. And to satiate the desiccated mouths of 100 bitter bastards, out came the slices of pepperoni. It was like biting into heaven. But if you bite into heaven, you will be bloated with salt the next day. And your father will allude to your corpulence, and in turn, you will allude to his. The two of us have salted the earth since then. No vegetable can grow. The fields that surround us are fallow. We eat, unconcerned, in a world where flavor itself is ephemeral, and a cough assigned a Greek letter fills your lungs until the rain rescinds the daily vagaries and discomforts that for some reason we fight to keep. We enjoy our brackish taste of heaven because hell is soup and cold sandwiches, and we no longer have time for those. And that's it.
I'm sorry. When you shared that piece, your voice changed. There was a different kind of power to it. So what I'd like to know is, what is the relationship between your speaking voice and your written voice?
That's a very good question. I tend to think my written voice is better than my speaking voice.
All right.
This interview is structured and it's going well, but making small talk with me, I find that can be, even calling it small talk as a judgment, is kind of difficult, that I'm not sure what to say. I'm halting and I'm kind of awkward. And that's one reason, I kind of picked up a pen or a keyboard or whatever. that when I get into a groove and recite something like a poem and get that entire idea out just like I want it, it's very gratifying, and it's something that doesn't always happen in conversation. I can be a little nervous, especially when I'm talking with big groups of people, and if I'm socializing for more than 2 or 3 hours, I'll be like, gosh, let's go home, because it's kind of exhausting. Like I have to remember, make eye contact with everyone. Make your anecdote, kind of edgy, but not too edgy, and all of that stuff. And with poetry, you really don't have to worry about any of that. It's like expressing yourself without that anxiety.
Very, very nicely stated. I really like that, because I had a conversation with someone earlier this week about essence, true essence. And we both shared that when we recite our works, that's when we feel like our essence is as pure as it can be. During that state when we're sharing, nothing can hurt us. Life's incredible, but once the poem is over, that's when the vulnerability sets in again, and that's what makes life difficult sometimes. Yeah, so I like what you said. Yes. So it sounds like your essence comes out, your true essence comes out when you're sharing a poem.
I'd like to think that, definitely. I hope that's true, and I want it to be true. So
very nice. Well, let me ask this question. Do you think you were meant to be a poet?
Actually, yes, I do. Given what my parents did for a living before they retired, my mom in the visual arts and my father writing academic work, sort of a hybrid of that would be the written word in artful form, and that's poetry. I think it's just I think it's really as simple as that.
What do you think, Alexander, what surprises you most about being a poet?
What surprises me sometimes is how or what I think people will respond to versus what people actually respond to. And I really don't have an answer for that. It's still something I'm trying to kind of figure out. Like my wife, will say, well, that's a real beautiful poem on something that I was really struggling with, and it'll get a big reaction, but I'll be very invested in writing a poem in a certain form, or trying my hand at writing a sonnet or something like that, and I'll be very pleased with it, and it won't get quite a response when I share it, and it's that's kind of eluded me, and I guess, and I mean, I'm not just writing to be successful. I mean, there's self-expression in it, but you want people to get your work, and I think that's why you just have to sort of keep your nose to the grindstone, even when you're not inspired, because sometimes something that comes from very humble beginnings can connect with a lot of people, and that's a very good feeling.
Well, let's talk about your book just for one more moment. A Refuge for Those Who Like Sad Endings. What did you learn once you completed that book? What did you learn about yourself?
What did I learn? It's a good question. I learned that there's a lot of introspection in the chapbook that I didn't think would be there.
Okay.
I wrote it. I didn't want it to be too self-absorbed, although, anytime you write something, I'm a historian, and, I select documents that have historical value. And, I mean, even if, and, the goal is to be, not politically oriented and be kind of as neutral as possible. But, I mean, you're still putting yourself into that kind of work by what you choose, by what you curate. Even if someone says, make a disco playlist, the songs you choose are going to say something about you, even if it's not immediately clear. So I was trying to keep it like that. I like poems with narratives. I like poems that take examples out of history, and I ended up just like the last one, writing about myself and my father, and being a heavier person, which came out a whole bunch of times, and just that it's okay to be introspective in that way, and that sometimes people do like to see that part of you, and they do like to see vulnerability as a kind of a style of art. And that's what I learned. Poetry is one of the few places where you can really kind of write yourself into the narrative and not have it be conspicuous. And I kind of felt like I was doing more and more of that as the writing process went on.
Wow. One more question about your book. When you think about the title of your book, A Refuge for Those Who Like Sad Endings, again, I love that. Give me, if you can, one word that sums up the poems in the book and explain how that particular word is connected. First, before you do that, I'd like to thank Poetic Hummingbird for that question. All right.
Okay. One word to sum up the poems. That's tough. Give me a second.
All right. Take your time.
Okay. I'll say cynical.
Cynical. Tell me more.
Cynical.
Tell me more.
Because they're not all sad. In that that there are bright moments in the poem. Orson Welles once said, I'm not a happy person, but there are moments of joy in my life. And I think when you sit down and you write something like this, you write it for pleasure. I don't think people really try to be happy. I think that, and I'm not the first person who has thought of this, but people get pleasure from controlling an emotion. And, if you watch horror movies or you're a goth or whatever, you know what it's like, to sort of live in a world of gloom and have that be pleasurable. So that's an element in there, along with some of the existential thinking. I think that if you're combining the humor and you're looking at the sadness and sort of the dark tone, when you put them together, you don't get something that's heartbreaking, but maybe a little cynical. That you have humor there that's that isn't universal, but kind of sets itself up against cultural sort of cultural cliches and systems that we live in and so forth. And I think that's the common thread that with all that was going on politically at the time, which, really kind of made me angry and afraid.
Yes, I understand.
I think when you put anger, fear, and humor together, I think maybe you get cynicism. I guess that's why I chose that word.
All right, very nice. Now it's time, Alexander, for what I call a poetry mini concert. So what I'd like you to do for me is to share 3 poems back to back.
3 poems back to back?
Yes. Yes. A mini concert.
Okay. All right. So the first one is going to be called Dolly Dimples. Dolly Dimples. The cause of the mass hysteria was one Celeste Geyer, the fat lady from Ringling Brothers. 588 pounds. Her dress, a big top tent. Her big top like a bass clef. Dimples as deep holes wedged into the earth that provided a skeleton of shelter, and rolls like the 3 rings she lived in. The best sideshow of the sideshow. A body soft as a whisper. Lights. Camera. Take. We stare at her picture, our eyes optimized by a lightsaber. Invisalign smiles, fentanyl patches over our mouths, lap bands latched securely across our waists, steps enumerated as we dance to Big Girl, You Are Beautiful, locked in our room as our parents scream about getting a divorce, praying for a heaven of mathematics and metadata with a degree prerequisite, inert and lifeless like a noble gas. No patience for a woman who did her bodybuilding in the kitchen. Each show, she declined 3 marriage proposals and treat her lover to a resplendent dinner for 4. The audacity of us to wish her well.
Wow.
That's the end of the first one. I will. This second one's a bit darker, and it's called Black and White and Red All Over. I wrote it after some certain recent events. It's a new poem. It's not in the chapbook. It is a reminder that we are all born red, the fur of placenta covering black and white, blood zebras, because coagulation is better than camouflage. But some of us emerge from the bath like fire engines still. The alarms and the clamor too hard to ignore, the black strap in the dresser drawer, as conspicuous as a rhyme. Now is the time for camouflage. The lion sleeps in the mighty jungle because it devours as we carry on with the quarry in a pile. The prey is our own. The killer spoke in a bigoted baritone, we moan conspicuously in time for the morning news cycle. To sob about the crimson man with the gun and the red stripes it made, weeping of bitter baptism against bizarre martyrs, our faces flushed ruddy in anger as the red lions multiply the pile and reload. And let me give you a third one.
All right.
This one's called Apollo 1-6. The stain of beetroot on my hands as I hammered the Centurion into negative space remains unsanitized. All astronauts have blue eyes. The spaceman with the round moon face proclaimed, demanded, one small step for a man, a proud man, a gilded man, an armored man, a man in stacked formation, a man rabid, foaming bullets inside the atrium, a man who sullies his hands but remains incorruptible. He brought loaves and fishes and an amplifier and promised us dreams in still images only of an unchanging topography like Mars, a shining city on Olympus Mons. We prayed and tore our raiment at the moonlight of his visage. He will launch, he will rise, because I gouged the Centurion, because we died for his sins. But fruit, when it sits in its own juices, tends to putrefy. Damn spot. These rancid, ruddy hands now reek with iniquity. But still, they will stain any white flag that, in weakness, I may wave into the blackness of space. And that's the end of the third.
All right. Thank you, sir. Here's another question generated by Poetic Hummingbird, and I like this one. There are a million poetry books, million poetry chapbooks, manuscripts. What do you think, Alexander, makes your poetic voice different? What do you bring to the table?
That's a good question. And, in history, when you're writing it, it's similar to the so what question. You tell a story, and very fairly someone asks, so what? Since there are a lot of chapbooks filled with kind of depressing poems. And I guess I guess my answer is history. That it's a slice of life at a very particular time, I guess, in American and world history. That even if you don't like it as for its poetry, if it's something you don't care for, I hope that you can enjoy it kind of as an artifact of the attack on the Capitol, or an active shooter, or even me describing, someone who lived, 50, 60 years ago. In the poems I just read, it's a snapshot of a particular point of view for someone who lives in a particular place and does a particular thing. And I think that contributes to its uniqueness. I'm not going to say that stylistically, I'm reinventing the wheel. I'm not. But hopefully, what comes across is kind of not a still image of Mars, but a still image of a distinct place and time, and trying to capture it, in verse rather than sort of in kind of staid prose.
I think another thing that comes across in your work in terms of what you bring to the table is that sense of vulnerability. Because it sounds like you've seen some things, you've experienced some things. During the pandemic, we're focused there. So the vulnerable part, I think, is very important. The cathartic part is very important. So, again, you bring a lot to the table. That, to me, is what makes your poetic voice different. Those things. And also, too, they're based on your lived experience, not based on anybody else's. They're yours. So that makes it different in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice. Very, very nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Yes, yes, I enjoy your work.
Again, it was a bit of a challenge putting some vulnerability into these poems, but I think it paid off, honestly.
All right. Again, so much is happening in our world, good friend. So much is happening. What do you view as being the role of a poet in modern day society?
Well, a poet can have so many roles. I mean, a poet, I'd like to think that the fellows in Congress and the people at the White House, they argue out these deals, in prose, in very lawyerly prose. And then they send the bills up the hill and they go through committee in this very technical way that, through my job, I'm familiar with. But the way they communicate that to people is often poetic, that the way we are ruled and the way that we speak to our rulers has a ton of poetry in it. And I will say I voted for Hillary Clinton, and I'm a Hillary supporter. I'm not a Trump supporter. But one thing that concerned me, even before I started writing this chapbook in that 2016 election, was that Hillary Clinton spoke in prose and Donald Trump tended to speak in poetry. Bible held up high, puts it down and then he lies, lying Ted. He may have borrowed a little from William Blake there, but, he's actually engaging his crowd with poetry. And, Barack Obama did that. George W. Bush did that with with a lot of biblical metaphors. And, I mean, even if you look back at older politics, I mean, where's the beef, which is a commercial slogan, but it's also a metaphor, became a slogan for a political campaign. That basically it's, how, I guess, in this kind of society we live in, that's how, our officials speak to us. And, when we protest and we petition, we do it very often in poetry. You can surround a building and chant a rhyme. It's everywhere.
Wow. We're almost at the end of our poetic journey together. Actually, I don't really want it to end because you make me think, and I like that. I like that a lot. I really, really do. You just don't know how much I like that. But we have time for one more poem, my friend. Favor us one more time.
Okay.
This is your showstopper, all right?
All right, yeah. And luckily, I still have one.
All right.
I think, yeah. Okay, so this is a true story. It's a historical event I wrote a poem about, and it definitely happened. I've heard about 20 versions of what happened. They're all different. And I just decided, with the liberties you could take with poetry to kind of choose the story I wanted. But it's called Collateral Damage, a True Story. People only fight when they think, not when they fight. And the best fight, in both senses of the word, took place in 1967. The favorite, a man who did everything like he was killing snakes, Senator Jim Webb. The long shot, a man who with will alone fought the law and won, Colonel Oliver North. Both midshipmen at Annapolis who boxed with the salty coarseness of a midshipman at Annapolis, neither willing to cede half the day for the other. Webb, a phalanx, could step outside himself and slap you, then return to his shield wall of gristle and sinew. North, shivering with rawness, gloves rolling in impossible crescents, red and stinging like frostbitten hands. Webb fired his cannons. You could hear the flesh sizzle before it hurt. His rival, undeterred, followed his own compass and led a ceaseless, tenebrous charge until his own skin was as dark as a Rembrandt. They kept treading water like this for 15 fucking rounds, cartridges brimming. They were senseless, and the crowd was thick. Then a fight broke out. The senator stood in uffish thought, put his vorpal sword down in mercy, and surrendered to the colonel, whose heart, beaten purple, was about to stop even if he wouldn't. It wasn't supposed to end this way. I don't even know who really won. In real fights, nobody dies. In real fights, satisfaction is neither demanded nor achieved. The senator and the colonel shook hands after the best fight ever and then went off to war. And that's the last one.
Wow. That is a powerful piece.
Mm-hmm. And I want to stress that this fight at the Naval Academy did happen, and people, 50 years, 50 years, who saw it 50 years ago still remember it. And it just kind of transfixed me because of the trajectories both of the boxers went on after that.
Yes. Writers and poets write for a myriad of reasons. Some write primarily to speak a message to their audience. Others write primarily because to stay silent is not an option. Alexander, why do you write, my friend?
I think the latter, staying silent is not an option, when conversation can kind of be difficult and you want to express how you feel about something or show an event that, might not be important historically, but is darn interesting, or reflect your vulnerability about something that would be difficult to do in plain speech. I found poetry very cathartic for this. And as I've mentioned, I've written poems before this project. I'm writing them after this project. I'm continuing. And, I think sometimes, even if you don't want to get up on a soapbox or share a poem with people, like it is a way to speak out, and it's a way to speak out in a way that's that in some ways can needle you a bit, but in other ways protect you. It's kind of like being in a womb that's just a little too small, you know.
Mm.
But yeah, it's you know, it's for me speaking out in, I guess, the best way that I can.
All right. Mm. Wow. Well stated. Now, your book, your manuscript, your book is ready to go. All you need is a publisher. Am I correct?
That's right. There's art. There's art in it, done by the fantastic Michelle Morgan. It's all ready. And you know, we had a bunch of people call in on this show. There's some interest. If someone wants to give me a chance, I'm, you know, I'm right here. So
well, we need to make it happen somehow. I'm going to see what I can do. We need to make it happen.
You so much.
Your work needs to get out there. Needs to get out there. So again, finally, how can listeners stay in touch?
Well, my email, and I'll give it out on the radio.
Okay.
Is alex.poster@gmail.com. I have an Instagram, which is alex.poster. It's not particularly poetic. It's pictures of food. But, you know, just drop me an email. And if you're interested. And believe me, you know, I get all sorts of email about stuff from work that's, you know, I'm not going to say what I do is dull. It's not, but it's stuff that I've been getting for 10 years. So, you know, an email about poetry would really kind of brighten my day. You know, I it's something I'd like to get. You know, I don't believe in gatekeeping or blowing people off. So if you have a question or if something I said, you know, you found inspirational or it made you mad, you know, I'm happy to have that conversation.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. So what's next, Alexander? You've written this book. We're going to find you a publisher. What happens next? Where do you go from here?
Well, I have about 10 poems at this point that I've written on my own afterwards. You know, I'm still keeping up with it. They're not as directly or sort of, they're not as focused thematically as A Refuge for Those Who Like Sad Endings. Some of them don't even have sad endings. But, you know, I'd like to, you know, get those poems in a collection too. And we had that question about rhymed versus unrhymed poetry. And some of the newer stuff I read, I hope folks can tell that I'm trying to integrate a little more rhyme into it and a little more wordplay.
All right. Well, we've reached the end of our poetic journey.
All right.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much because I learned so much just listening to you talk.
Well, thank you.
I really did, and that's why I think you're going to go far. Because not only are you a great poet, you also share a message. And that's what people need. They need a message. That life can be tough sometimes, but there's also some beauty in it. But it can be tough sometimes, and it's okay to acknowledge that. That's okay.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any words you'd like to share to the listeners before we go?
Well, I'd like to say to anyone, who's listening in, thank you. Thank you for your questions, and you made the show for me interesting, and offered some different perspectives, and if you just tuned in just to listen to me, I really appreciate that. And
all right, very nice.
Yeah, I'm grateful.
All right, good people. We are at the end of another program. I'd like to thank my guest, Alexander Poster. Incredible name, by the way. That's Star Power right there. That's a great name.
Thank you.
Star Power. All right, everyone. As you know, I share every week. Let poetry ring somewhere throughout the land. Until next time, I'm Michael Anthony Ingram, and good night. Good night, Alexander.
Good night.
Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio, is available on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can also check out the website at QLPOR.com.